I got to tell you, I am a big fan of yours, so it's really an honor to meet you. I'm not lying when I say How to Train Your Dragon is one of my favorite films of all time, so it's great to finally talk in person.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, so let's talk about the success of this film, right? Because you've had a good run at the box office. It's critically lauded. I mean, everyone loves The Wild Robot. How are you feeling at this point in time regarding the film's reception?
Oh, I couldn't be happier. We all fell in love with the story, and everybody worked so incredibly hard on this, and it really was a labor of love. I remarked to my producer at one point, like I actually said, "Why does this film look this good?" Because there were moments in the film that just so exceeded my expectations, um, and his answer was, "People just love this film." So I think that the entire studio just fell in love with it and worked so incredibly hard on it. So to see it getting this reception and to see people reacting to it the way we felt about it when we worked on it is really, really gratifying.
All right, so the Google tells me that you guys are working on a sequel. So number one, is that true? But number two, Peter Brown had a trilogy of novels, the original books. It was the idea always to have three films, or was that just based on the success of what's going on as far as granting a sequel now?
Yeah, nothing has been greenlit so far. I think that we're waiting to see how this one plays out. We were very, very careful to end this book where the original first book ends. I was actually a little bit nervous about that. I didn't want to presume success, and I didn't want to create a film that actually relied on another film to come along to complete the story. So it was really important that this film be a standalone entity. For that reason, I actually wrote two endings. One where Roz stays on the island, and one which is more true to the book, where she returns. And I offered both of those up to Kristen and Margie, our executives. And to their credit, they didn't even hesitate. They said, "No, end it like the book ends." So that was exciting to me because of the more emotional, the emotional scale of that choice. But at the same time, it was a problem because I needed to find a way that people wouldn't. I was like, I don't. I was deathly aware that if people were upset at the end of this film, they would text each other and say, "Never see this film. It's the worst thing I've ever gone through." Because I went through this entire film, and at the end, I was just so devastated. So I had to find a way to be true to the book, but also to wrap things up in an emotionally affirming way. And hence the ending that we created, where on his presumably on his next migration, Bright Bill stops by the biodome to see where Roz is. And of course, the most important thing of all is to confirm that Roz didn't get reset. Everything she said to them was true. Wherever she exists, it exists in a place that will no longer be accessible by universal dynamics. So we're set up for book two should, and I've read book two, which I love. So we're set up for it should they decide to go.
All right, so I mean, I could talk to you forever about, what I think are the most, important themes of the film. But when you read the novel, what made you want to adapt it into a movie? Because there's so many things here, motherhood, diversity, inclusion, adoption. There's so many things that we could latch onto as the biggest theme. But what made you want to adapt this story?
I was compelled by the lost robot. I was compelled by the idea that that robot then becomes a mother, and it's something that she's not programmed to do. So all these things I found really, really compelling. The environment and the situation with all these real animals. As animators, oddly, we don't really get to do real animals that much. Usually, our animals are, they have jobs. They have jobs and schedules and things. And I haven't done animals as animals since I worked on Lion King. And everybody really was, that captured everybody's imaginations as well. Um, and on top of all of that, it is unusually relatable, and you don't always get that. So that's just such a bonus that you have the ideas of parenthood and kids growing up in a situation where they have, conflicts with their parents about things. So all that just made it even more, I think, interesting for all of us.
One of the things that you do so well, which is actually quite brilliant, is that, the animals in this film, they're not singing and dancing and holding hands. The bear eats other animals, the fox eats birds. And the way you address that as far as life and death in the real animal world is so brilliant. So I'm just wondering, how many iterations did you go through to get to that point? Was that something that you really had set in the beginning, or did the studio say, okay, maybe we can't be too dark as far as realism?
Yeah, to the studio's credit, they never shied away from that whole thing. I think everybody understood that without those consequences, this film wouldn't work. You set the dials on your film early on, if you're doing it the right way, so that everybody in the audience understands the stakes and they understand the parameters of the world. And so we had to establish that this is a life and death place. If we didn't, the whole idea of having to reprogram yourself and cooperate to survive a winter, per se, that wouldn't work. So we had to. So there's two times in the film that we handle the subject of death in a very straight way. Certainly, when she crashes onto the nest, she hits the nest. We handle it really straight. We also drop in and have a good deal of fun with it and handle it in a funny way, like when Pinktail's kids are talking about it, and we kill a lot of crabs, and there's this sort of callousness to it, and that was also necessary because it has to be such a normal thing on the island that the animals don't get super flustered by it. Like they all get it. Nobody wants to end up as somebody else's dinner, but at the same time, they're very pragmatic. It's just the way it works here. And for that reason, I really enjoyed working on Fink as a character because he represents really the entire animal kingdom. Uh, he just flat out says like, look, you got to learn how things work on this island, and kindness isn't a survival skill. So he just lays it out for Roz. So he is a particular favorite of mine as far as the animals are concerned. And seeing how his thinking changes also helps me understand why all the other animals' attitudes are shifting as well.
All right, so I want to ask you about Roz as far as the character design, because when you look at the novel, it's got like, kind of like that Iron Giant look with a more like, kind of like a strange head. But now, the robot is more rounded, it's warm and friendly, it's got the big baby eyes. And I was thinking, wow, this really feels like almost like, BB-8 or like Johnny Five from Short Circuit. So talk about adapting the character to the movie if different from the book.
Yeah, so visually, Peter Brown has a very specific robot, but he also has a very graphic style, the way that his illustrations work. So we had a humanoid design that had some very specific proportions, but we also had a lot of information that was left for us to fill in. We had we had a lot of articulation that we wanted to put into Roz because the fact that she's a robot means there's a lot of, I think, surprises that we could build into her as far as the way she moves, doors and things and tools that she can produce. So all these things I thought, let's have a robot that has enough interesting things going on that we can always surprise the audience and keep people engaged with Roz and give the animators a lot of latitude as far as pantomime and inventing different kinds of movement. So we gave those arms of hers the ability to extend and stuff. And that's how they're described in the original illustrations. So we tried to stay as true as we could to all of that. The final design for Roz was really cracked by one of our artists named Hyun Ha. And we had all been fiddling around with our versions of what the movie Roz could look like. But one day he came in and he had built something in CG, and it's pretty much the Roz you see on screen. He had this really beautiful humanoid proportion thing that was true to the proportions of the robot in the book, but he came up with this circular, this language of shape, which was these spheres that just gave her this beautiful, friendly look. And it felt just very universal. Margie Cohn, like immediately or at the very beginning of the project, challenged me to come up with a robot that would be classic and that would always be identified with DreamWorks and this movie in particular. So we had some we had a big, we had a big order that we had to fulfill, but I feel like everybody did it beautifully.
You guys really nailed it. All right, let me sneak one last question in before they pull me away. So this is the metrics question that they want me to ask. So obviously you got the live action Lilo and Stitch coming out next year that people are excited for. So number one, are you actually confirmed to be voicing Stitch? And number two, did they come to you and ask your opinion on the story or anything? I mean, do you have any involvement in that film?
So the director contacted me about a year and a half ago. He texted me or he emailed me and he said, would you be interested in reprising your role as the voice of Stitch? And I immediately wrote back and said, absolutely. I still do all the recordings of him. I do them for parades, for toys, for ice shows and things like that. I would love to do it for the film. So he ended up calling me up on the phone and we were supposed to talk for like 10 minutes. We ended up talking for like 2 hours and it was just the best conversation. And we talked a little bit about the DNA of the film and he asked me a few questions. So I have already recorded I've done 4 different recording sessions. I would expect maybe I have possibly one last recording session if there's anything that we need to pick up for the very end of the film. However, I have not seen the finished film because it was still in progress when I did the recording sessions. So I can say I have seen bits and pieces, but I have yet to see the finished film because I don't think it's quite finished yet.
Awesome. Chris, like I said, I'm a big fan of yours. Thank you for your time. And I sincerely hope next March you're holding that animation Oscar because you made a spectacular film. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.